Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where I do anything crochet, sewing, or crafty. And for this video, I am going to be showing you how to make your very own summer-friendly top that I've got here. And it is maternity friendly, in case you need to know, because I am expecting baby number 2. So if you want something flowy or something for maternity, this is the tutorial for you, so just keep watching. First, you want to get some tailor tape and go ahead and measure your bust. And once you have that number, you're going to write it down. And I did go ahead and drape the fabric over to get an idea of how wide I wanted this to be. Then I started prepping the fabric. I ended up using a fitted sheet that was a twin size, and I was just cutting off the elastic portion until I realized tearing it was so much faster. So I tore through it all, and then I moved on to cutting some of those edges so that it could lay flat for whenever I actually cut it. And now you want to do some measurements. You're going to end up cutting 3 rectangles. One of them is the first one, so it was the bust. Plus 4 inches tells you how long the rectangle needs to be, and then how tall is how wide you want it to set on your person. Plus 2 inches just to give it some extra room. And then the 2 tiers below that are double the length from the previous tier and 1 extra inch wide. Then I just started ironing all my fabric out. This is really important because you definitely want your fabric to cut pretty straight whenever you get to going on it, so just saying. For materials, I would recommend having an acrylic ruler, a rotary cutter, a cutting mat, and then you can have little scissors too. But I started out by getting all of my fabric cut so that I could begin the initial. I did double up my first rectangle just so that it wouldn't be see-through. And then I cut the length that I needed it to be. Also, the lines for the fabric ended up being really awesome to try and cut straight. So highly recommend plaid if you're looking to cut straighter lines or you have trouble cutting straight lines. And then you were gonna want to lay your piece over just to make sure that it fits properly. And here I was mocking up a couple of different options for the straps. I did decide to go ahead with the thicker strap for me, which ended up being 2 inches wide. And for the length of the straps, I took 2 tailor's tape and attached them on, and then I tried to tie bows to figure out how long that I needed them to be. But you can do this however you want to. It's just what I found worked for me. Popping on for a minute just to talk about the sleeves. You can do however long and however wide you want. And where I want them to fall ends up being around 37 and 38 inches. And somebody leave a comment below, like if you know anything about making straps. But I think the back ones may need to be just a little bit longer than the front ones so they come around the same length. I'm going to do 4 inches and fold the 4 over, but then I also want the seam allowance. So I'm actually gonna do like 4.5 inches because I think my seam allowance is usually pretty big. That's what I'm going to cut right now. I'm gonna cut 2 strips that are for the front, 4.5 inches wide by 37 inches long, and then I'm gonna cut 2 for the back that are 4.5 inches wide and 38 inches long. So your girl went to town cutting those straps. You can see just starting out to make them straight on the bottoms and then cut them lengthwise. Once you've got one cut to the length that you want, if you want to just lay this one over your next set that you're gonna cut just to get an idea of how long it should be, it might make things run just a little faster. So that's what I did here. I just laid it over to give a rough estimate of where I'm cutting and how long it needs to be, making sure that I don't actually cut that first piece that I originally cut. Got 2 37-inch by 4.5 right here. And then I've got my 2 38 by 4.5. What we're going to be doing is folding these in half with the right side of the fabric on the inside and the wrong side on the outside. Just gonna run a 1/4 inch seam as close as we can get all the way down. Then I just went through sewing all the straps all the way down times 4 because there are 4 of them. And then we are going to work on turning them all. I just took a safety pin, attached it at the top, and then I took this crochet hook that I have that's really long, and I inserted it into the strap all the way up and hooked it onto that safety pin and pulled it out. But there's lots of ways to turn things, like sewing a string on the end and then pulling the string all the way through. Once you get it turned, I do recommend flipping it around and ironing it. And then I went ahead and finished off the ends just so that they wouldn't fray. And if you have problems with it not going through, you can use a piece of paper to back it to help it feed, and then just tear the paper off when you're done. Alright, before you sew all the bodice pieces together, you will want to go ahead and make sure it fits, and then mark where you need the pleats to be in the front. And then I went ahead and attached the straps, and they are going to be sandwiched between the two fabrics. So I just checked to make sure that the straps are going to be centered with the pleats. To sandwich everything together for the top bodice piece, you'll want both of the wrong sides of the fabric facing on the outside and the right side facing on the inside. So then you'll put it together. Make sure that you have your straps sandwiched in between this as well, so that when you sew along that top seam, you get the straps and the top of the bodice all together. Just ignore the fact that I don't have the straps because I did it out of order and had to go back and seam rip. So here it is. I'm rolling out the pieces, and then I need to top stitch. But before I do that, I decided to iron. So with the right side of the bodice piece facing on the out, I flipped it out, ironed it flat facing to me, and then I flipped it back facing me. Again, your strap should be sandwiched in here, both the front and the back, but I did things out of order. And then I just kept pressing a good ironing seam along here. And then after I was done with that, I took it to the sewing machine and sewed a top stitch all the way around. A reminder, your straps will be sandwiched in here too, but still I did it out of order. And your top stitch will look something like this. Moving on, you will want to go ahead and get those pleats, which we marked before, but we shouldn't have sewn. So with the wrong side facing on the outside, I pinned those pleats, and then I took a disappearing marker and I marked how far it was from the top. I think it was a couple inches at the top, and then the actual pleat at the bottom is 1 inch spacing. I just took that disappearing ink, marked it up. Then I took it to the sewing machine and I folded it in half in the middle of that pleat and pinned it before I put it on the sewing machine, just to make sure that everything stayed put. And I was sewing the pleat from the bottom of the bodice to the top. I think that was the easiest way for me to do it. Once you're done, it will look something like this. Again, your straps will be at the top if you do things in order. And then I moved on to adding the zipper, so I just put it up on the mannequin. You can also do this on yourself and mark where you want that zipper to go. I was trying to do up and down, but having a little bit of difficulty getting it perfect, but who cares? It doesn't have to be perfect. I took a chalk and I marked where I wanted it to go on the zipper, and I made sure that I had that pinned before whenever I pulled it off. Once you have it marked, you can go ahead and just unzip and start sewing it. I folded down that top portion of the zipper to get it in with the stitch. So you sew all the way down the zipper until you get to the end. Make sure that you're using a zipper foot here, it really helps. And move that zipper out of the way when you need to. After you're done sewing the first one, I did go back and add a top stitch along the edges. So you just fold it over as close as it'll get to the zipper seam, but obviously not covering it. And then put your foot down and start sewing along there from the top to the bottom. Again, just make sure that you move that zipper out of the way as you need to when you're sewing, because it does tend to get in the way. And then you'll repeat the process on the other side, marking where the zipper needs to be and sewing all the way down. Once you have your zipper attached, you may want to try it on your body or your mannequin piece, just so that you don't get done with this top portion moving on to the next one and it doesn't fit. And I started on the first ruffle, so this one should be double the length of your previous one, and then the width is actually 1 inch added on to what the first panel was. And you start out by sewing a really long stretch, and you want to make sure that your thread tension on the top is as loose as it can be, and just cut that off. We're not back stitching here, we're just sewing straight across, and we're doing 3 parallel lines. So I got done with the first and I moved on to the second. And try to make sure that you're not crossing these lines, because if you do, it will cause problems when you're trying to create the ruffle. So just leave really long tails in the beginning and the end. Don't cross and don't backstitch. Cut those off. And there's the last parallel line that I've got going on. Once you're done sewing those, you can start to create the ruffle. And then to create the ruffle portion, you'll want to separate the upper and lower threads from each other, and then you can pull on the upper threads and you'll feed that ruffle all the way down through your fabric. I would recommend doing this on both sides just so that it goes a little bit faster and you don't have to move the ruffles all the way across the fabric. And once you're done and you know that it's all lining up, you will want the inside or the wrong side of your bodice piece to be facing out towards you, and you'll insert the ruffle into the bodice with the wrong side of the fabric on the inside, like when you open it up right here. So just make sure that you're looking at the wrong side of the ruffle here, and facing up at you should also be the wrong side of the fabric. And as long as everything is matching up, you can go ahead and start pinning it all. And just make sure that you have that ruffle seam sewed together so that whenever you sew all of this in the round, you're also closing that in so that you don't have like an open piece before you start sewing. And then you just sew the ruffle to the bodice. And then you can move on to cutting the last tier, which is the third panel. These are two identical, matching in length to the second panel, but they're 1 inch wider. And I did make sure and fold them over and then trim them really good because I wanted these to be fairly straight since this is going on the very end of it. And sew those two panels together so that you have one extremely long strip of fabric to work with. And then you just start on making the ruffle. So this one is going to take you forever, sewing the first layer all the way down, cutting it off, making sure you keep those long tails on there, and just doing that 3 times over because we need 3 layers of stitches. Again, making sure that you aren't back stitching, you have your upper tension the highest that it can go, and you are not crossing. And then you can start on making the actual ruffle portion, so just separating it and pulling on the top all the way over, just like we did with the first ruffle. Once you have it, make sure that it's lining out to be however many inches you need and adjust it by pulling it tighter or looser. Now you'll want to attach it onto the previous piece. So you need the inside of your top to be facing towards you, and then the wrong side of that new ruffle is going to be facing out towards you as well. So all of this should be the wrong side facing you when you're clipping it together, making sure again that you're sewing the top of that ruffle portion to the bottom of the previous ruffle. And we're just going to sew a stitch all the way along, but I did make sure to close up those ruffles all so that it's like one solid circle before you actually start sewing the ruffle portion together. And then yeah, you just work the seams together. And I was making sure that the ruffles weren't like folding in weird places, and I just kind of kept a finger and a hand under there the whole time while I was sewing on and off to make sure that ruffle fed through. And here it was, like the first mock-up. I was pretty impressed. I still have to roll this and do like a rolled hem stitch. But yeah, I mean, it's looking a lot like I envisioned. The only thing that I think I'm going to be going back and doing, which I don't know if you end up running into this, but everywhere that I ended up seaming all the hem, I'm going to be taking out these basting stitches. But before I do that, I want to go ahead and add in another row of stitches on the inside, on the outer edges where I was sewing. I'm going to go through and I'm going to add a zigzag stitch all along the edges to finish it off so that it doesn't fray as much as it is right now, and also to keep it from ever tearing in the future so I don't have to go back and fix that rolled hem. And here I'm just picking the basting stitches for the ruffles that you can see from the outside and pulling any of that thread away, just making sure that I don't poke holes in it. And then you need to run a top stitch along just to give it a more finished look and make sure that that inside seam sets down against you instead of like moving around when you wear it. So I just went ahead and put the top stitch down, and I did this for each tier. So here's for the second tier, and there you go. That's what the top stitch ended up looking like on each tier. Then moving on to do the rolled hem, you'll want to create one long stitch all the way around the bottom as close as you can get to the edge, and it's usually like 1/4 of an inch, and then you are going to fold it to the inside and you're going to sew another seam. It doesn't matter on either of these how straight they are, just mostly straight is fine, and do another 1/4 inch seam all the way down. It takes a long time to go all the way around to do the rolled hem stitch, but it's actually pretty easy once you get going. And then once you have that done, you will do the last fold to get that final roll. And you could roll this 3 times and iron it, but I was lazy, so sewing it 3 times seemed more logical for me. And I just roll that and stitch it. And this one, you do want to make sure that you try to keep it as even as possible, because this is going to be the seam on the edge of your piece. And here's the final reveal. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the video. If you're staying until now, leave a comment, like, subscribe, whatever you're feeling, and I can't wait to see you in another video. Bye!